Hello friends, this is Worm, long time no see, am I right? Only reason why is because Destiny 2 is just a little bit boring right now. With that being said, it's Monday, which means it's time we do an episode of Exotic Recrafting. This is a series where we talk about weak, underused, or straight up bad exotics in Destiny 2. Also, we're going to add a category to that. We're going to talk about weapons that are not really weak, they're not really bad, but they're just not used as much as I would prefer to see them, which I guess kind of would fall into the underused category. But anyways, on the menu for today, we have Arbalest. And before we get to talking about it, I want to remind y'all, I will be live Tuesday and Thursday nights. I know y'all haven't seen any new videos here on the YouTube channel for the past few weeks, but I have been live for the past few weeks. So Tuesday and Thursday nights, come by, say hi, talk about Destiny. We do a lot of good stuff. And yeah, with that plug out of the way, let's talk about Arbalest. And I chose Arbalest because I feel like Arbalest is a good kind of metric of what a weapon could potentially, like what kind of weapon is, you know, it's not underpowered, it's not bad, it's got a very unique place in the game, which we'll talk about here in just a second, but it's just not something that feels really intuitive to use when you have a lot of other choices. Let's talk about what it does first. Of course, its first perk here, or its intrinsic perk, is Compounding Force. Fires slugs that cause massive damage to combatant shields, strong against barrier champions. It's got that built-in anti-barrier feature, which is really nice. It also has the perk Disruption Break, which states that breaking an enemy shield with this weapon makes them more vulnerable to kinetic damage for a brief period. This is a 50% damage boost to any kinetic damage, which is really strong. It also has a catalyst. The catalyst basically gives it Genesis, which will allow it to reload when you break an enemy shield, which is a pretty, I mean, it makes sense on Arbalest. And Arbalest, like we said, it's not a bad perk. It has a very specific niche. And, you know, I don't want to undersell the niche that it has, because in a situation where your team is build crafting around the use of kinetic weapons, Arbalest is the best option you can use. Like if you are on a Grandmaster Nightfall team and somebody on your team has Arbalest and you have, say, like Succession or the Supremacy or something of that nature, something that's a kinetic damage, you can do a lot of damage to enemies. And that's why, like, I don't want to sit here and say that Arbalest is bad. But at the same time, if you're just running casual environments, if you're running, you know, without a coordinated team, it feels really weak. And I would rather just use Ariana's Vow or Wish Ender or something of that nature. So I've got a few buffs in here that I think could help Arbalest a little bit for what it does. And of course, we're going to talk about the stat bumps I would recommend first. Then we'll talk about catalyst perk substitutions and additions. Then move on to the intrinsic perk changes and the unique perk changes. Although for Arbalest, I don't have any full rework ideas because I think Arbalest is already, it has a role that it needs to play, and I don't think we should change that too much. Let's start with the stat bumps though. First of all, aim assistance is the only thing that I think this weapon could benefit from. It does not need it by any means, but it could benefit from. And I think the one concern I have with aim assistance is you don't want this to become a menace in the Crucible, because I don't know if y'all remember when this first came out with what was it, the Gambit update long ago. I can't even remember the name of the season or activity and stuff, but it was a monster in the Crucible because it just hit every single shot because its aim assistance was so sticky. So I think buffing the aim assistance is a little bit risky, but at the same time, I don't know if you've seen in the background by now, but there's a lot of shots I'm just missing on enemies I shouldn't be missing. I'm getting flinched off target, and it's really frustrating because it is a special ammo weapon, so you really have to be mindful of your special ammo and stuff. But really, I don't think it necessarily needs an aim assistance buff. That's just one of the stat bumps I would like to see. You could also make a debate for reload speed, because Arbalest has a really slow reload. It's a 2.5 second reload without any mods on, any, you know, gauntlet mods on. But with that being said, those are the only two real stat boosts I think it should get. Now let's talk about the catalyst. Of course, catalyst currently gives it Genesis, which I think is a great perk. And that's actually the reason why I'm hesitant to say it needs a reload buff, because Genesis will just reload your magazine anytime you break shield. And I don't know about y'all, but every single activity that you do in Destiny 2 has enemies with shields. Okay, so like that shouldn't be an issue at all. But I think when it comes to the catalyst, we could add some other stuff to it to make it just a little bit more zesty in terms of what it does. Obviously, the first idea I had was under over. But then that just didn't make sense because Arbalest already breaks shields in one shot. It doesn't really need under over, so it can deal more damage to the subsequent shots to the shield that you've already broken. Doesn't make sense. So instead, I thought of Shield Disorient, which is a perk that is no longer present in the game. You can still get, I think, one weapon which is the Python, which we're not going to go into all that stuff. But Shield Disorient was basically a perk that stated when you broke an enemy's shield with the matching element type, it would cause a blinding effect, or a disorienting effect. Sorry, a disorienting effect to nearby combatants. I think the Arbalest could use a unique variant of Shield Disorient that allows it to disorient on any shield break. So if you break, a barrier champion shield, obviously barrier champions can't be disoriented, but any surrounding enemies can be disoriented, and then they're disoriented for, just 4 seconds or whatever it is. That would be just a nice little, cherry on top to what it's already doing in game. Plus, again, it builds into that shield breaking identity, which Arbalest is known for. Now, that's really all I wanted to primarily talk about with the Catalyst perk substitutions, but there is one more that I have to pay homage to. There's kinetic trimmers. Me personally, I don't really like the idea of kinetic trimmers on this weapon, but hey, I know that it's kinetic, it's a special ammo weapon. Like, I know a lot of people are just instantly, oh, kinetic trimmers, that's gotta be the one. So kinetic trimmers is an honorable mention for a potential Catalyst perk addition. Now let's go ahead and talk about compounding force, the intrinsic perk. Basically, its current state right now is that it's a kinetic linear fusion rifle. That's its intrinsic trait. It's a kinetic special ammo linear fusion rifle, which granted is very unique. Like, mind you, like, number one, when it comes to the kinetic feature, that is the only linear fusion rifle in the game that is kinetic damage, and it's one of only 2 fusion rifles in the game that are kinetic, the other one being Bastion. So I think that there is an argument to be made as to this remaining just its exotic featureness. It's a kinetic linear fusion, but I think that we could also add just a little tiny bit on. The first one, of course, in Destiny 2, when you break an enemy shield with a matching element type, there's a small explosion that deals damage to that enemy, as well as enemies around that enemy. I think that could be brought over to Arbalest, but apply it to all shields. So anytime you break an enemy shield, there's just a small little explosion, same in size and damage to those other like shield explosions that you'd get from breaking a solar shield with sunshot or something like that. But I think the Arbalest could use that just because it would give it, again, more shield breaking incentive, but also give it a little tiny bit more lethality. Plus, it would just make the weapon feel really nice. So adding that to compounding force would be great. And then the other idea that I had is actually, while I was playing and getting some gameplay footage for this, sometimes it's difficult to find those shielded enemies. Sometimes they might spawn out of a dropship. Sometimes they might come out of a wall on the left side of the map or the right side of the map. And so I think that a feature you could add to compounding force is when you are close to a shielded enemy, let's say like 50 meters, just for example, it will mark that enemy. And maybe you could make an argument that it marks multiple enemies, and all it does is mark so that you know where to go. It doesn't mark it for your team. It doesn't apply any sort of debuff. It's just marked so that you know where you can go to break that enemy shield. That way you could be the designated shield breaker for your team. I think that'd be a really nice addition they could add to compounding force. But with that being said, I think that's really all the change we need to talk about for compounding force. Now, in terms of disruption break, the unique perk, and this one doesn't really, this change I have, sorry, it doesn't really apply directly to disruption break itself, but a couple of seasons ago, actually several seasons ago, like 2 or 3 years ago, something like that, Arbalest received a massive nerf to its damage against champions, 25% or something like that. Just unnerf that. And I know that doesn't have anything to do specifically with disruption break, but one of the reasons why they did that was because disruption break was allowing it to deal so much damage to champions. Just unnerf that. Again, this is the shield breaking weapon. Like, let it have a ton of damage against shielded enemies, because outside of using it against, like a barrier champion, or enemy with a shield, you're not using this for ad clear. You're not using this against high health targets like bosses or anything like that. You're specifically saving it for these shielded enemies. So unnerf that damage to champions so that it can be the absolute go-to for champion shield breaking. And I know, well, what about other weapons? What about Wish Ender? And what about Ariana's Vow and stuff like that? Those weapons, they aren't necessarily built around breaking shields. They have other fantasies behind them and stuff like that. Arbalest is the shield breaking weapon, which is why I think that it should have that damage nerf undone. But with that being said, I think that's basically all I want to talk about with Arbalest. I think if you do even some of these changes, Bungie, like Arbalest will start to see a return to the more like, you know, more to the meta. But with that being said, I want to hear your thoughts on these changes and on Arbalest. How do you think you could make it better? Tell me that stuff in the comments. Of course, do me a favor, drop a like, helps the channel a lot. Subscribe for more daily Destiny content, conversations, debates, discussions, all that good stuff. And guys, I will see y'all on Tuesday nights. Bye for now, guys.